Greetings, everyone. This is Jeff Roars. I'm the CMO of Jobvite, and welcome to our Too Talented session on candidate communications here during the Summer to Evolve. I'm going to fire up the old PowerPoint here in a second and tell you a little bit about our programming here in the Summer to Evolve. We are joined today by Baer, the founder, CEO of Convince and Convert, and Madeline Laurano, the founder of Aptitude Research. Very excited to dig in with them momentarily, but before we do, I want to remind you that this is week 4 in our Summer to Evolve, so we've got a lot more sessions coming up, and we have a number that we've already recorded. Our theme this week, of course, is candidate communication, but you can see the themes that are coming up over the next 8 weeks, and we hope that you will consider joining us. The rest of this week is a really good one. So tomorrow, we've got a demo day around our candidate communication as your competitive advantage. And then I'm really excited about our break room on Friday. We're joined by Damon Wayans Jr. You may know him from such television shows as New Girl and Happy Endings. His co-founder of Special Guest App, Chris Jones. The two of them are going to join us, and they're going to talk about that app. They actually appeared on the very first original Apple television show and pitched their idea and got some financing for the app then. And it helps connect entertainers and talent with folks who want to book them for events. And during the pandemic, they have had to make a pivot and get into virtual events. So they're going to tell us a little bit about that. So all that stuff. Register at thesummertoevolve.com, and we hope you'll be along for the ride. Now, without further ado, Madeline, we're going to fire up your camera here and have you join us. Madeline is just a wealth of knowledge in talent acquisition. You can see her experience there, things that she's authored and ways you can connect with her there on LinkedIn. Madeline, welcome. Very glad to have you here today.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm thrilled to be here. I love the series, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. So thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. One of the things we do with all of our speakers is we dig into some of your summer favorites. So I'm scanning it here. I'm wearing your snow cone shirt.
Perfect.
The snow cone. But I love the movie selection there. What About Bob? Is it something that you purposefully put on, or you are like me and every time it's on you have to watch it?
It's every time it's on I have to watch it, but now that my kids are getting older, I'm constantly trying to reintroduce them to movies I love, so they got a kick out of What About Bob. But it's great, and I'm from New England, so it's close to home.
Lake Winnipesaukee. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today. And our second guest is a longtime friend of mine, Baer. Welcome as we fire up your camera there. Jay is the founder of Convince and Convert, a great consultancy that does anything and everything digital. He has authored many books. His latest one that he co-authored is Talk Triggers. Highly recommend it. He is the creator and co-host of the Social Pros podcast, which I had the honor of being the co-host of for a number of years. I could go on and on and on, Jay, but how are you doing today?
I'm pretty good, my friend. I'm also wearing the same blazer as I was in my profile photo here on the slide. That's next level coordination.
I like that very much. Yeah. Do you have the lapel pin though? I can't see your video yet on mine.
This one I think is different. This is a pink one. I think it's a white one in the picture, but it's pretty close.
Excellent. So looking at your summer favorites,
yes.
Greek islands. Can you narrow it down to a specific island, or is it that you are an island hopper?
Island hopper, but when I do that, I tend to not do the big ones that people always go to, like Santorini or Crete, because it sort of gets overrun by tourists. So the more obscure, the better. Probably my favorite is Lefkada, which is off the usual trail.
Well, someday I hope that we as Americans can go back to Greece. That would be.
I'd be happy to go to Kroger, much less a Greek island right now. Like I've got a very low bar.
You can also go to Greek town in Detroit, I guess. So
yeah.
Well, I am your humble servant here, Jeff Rohr, CMO of Jobvite. I've done a number of things. I keep too many bees. I am a beekeeper. My latest update is I have a hive that went queenless, and I'm beside myself. So if you want to talk bees, reach out to me on LinkedIn.
What happens then, Jeff? What is the downside of having no
Oh,
queening?
it's a whole thing. First of all, I tried to merge two hives, one which had gone queenless, and the hive I merged it with was trying to rear a queen, and I think those devilish queenless bees killed the queen before it was born.
Oh,
And
no.
so now they're on a slow slide down to just dying as a hive unless I can get them to accept a new queen. So I'm going to try and figure that out, see if I can rear one. But it being the middle of summer, it's kind of difficult. But I have two very happy, healthy, thriving hives. So if you are in the Cleveland, Ohio area later this summer and would like some fresh honey, just swing on by. Hey, before we get started, if you've got questions, ask them via the questions panel. I will be watching that along with Rachel and Shanna on our team, who are behind the scenes. And then if you are deriving any sort of powerful insights from this, please feel free to tweet those or share those with the hashtag JobviteS2E, which is our hashtag for Summer to Evolve. And we are recording this session, and we will make it available to you in an email afterwards, as well as anybody who registered but did not attend. And then we post it on the summertoevolve.com. So with that, I think one more click gets me here, and that allows me to turn off this thing. And now I can see you, which is awesome. So I am very excited about this conversation because I come out of marketing communication, being a digital marketer, and the idea, Madeline, of candidate communications has been very interesting as I've come on board with Jobvite, because it is this moment in time that is so powerfully important to the recipient. Yeah. And yet for recruiters and talent acquisition professionals, it can be very rote. And if it ends up mechanical, that can be problematic. So as you think of communications with candidates, how do you get folks jazzed about this? How do you get them energized to think about how do they do it better to have better outcomes?
It's so interesting to me. I mean, I could talk about this topic forever. Jay, I'm sure you could too. But what I found is that it's such a simple, basic concept. We have to communicate with candidates to keep them engaged, and companies still don't necessarily know how to do that or feel very hesitant or overcomplicate the communication. What we found in our research is that 1 in 2 companies are still sending out just emails as their primary form of communication. 62% of companies aren't even communicating at all with hourly workers, not even to let them know that they didn't get the job. So this is such an area of opportunity. To me, it doesn't require a huge investment. It doesn't require a huge overhaul. It just requires a commitment to be able to provide frequent, meaningful, and consistent communication.
Excellent. Jay, you're coming at this from someone who is a broad practitioner around marketing communications, social, everything else. You know, as we reached out to you on this, I imagine your brain started swirling a little bit about this unique niche of communication. How have you started to think about it?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what Madeline has said. Certainly consistency of communication is one thing, but also varying or broadening the modality of your communication is just as important in my estimation. We have become so reliant on email as the de facto choice for how we communicate with team members, and we have to understand that in some cases, especially during this disruption, that may not A, be the best way to reach them, B, their preference, or C, even something, especially for younger workers, that they really like at all. So if you're going to go to the trouble of sending an email, why don't we also think about, could we reach team members via text message? Could we reach them via a community group? There's an interesting new startup company, Jeff, I'll send you the link to it after the show. I just found out about it last week, that's actually doing private podcasts. It's actually internal comms podcast system, right? So it's like you make a podcast, but it's not even on the podcast directory. You can't find it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's only set up for your internal teams. I love that premise as well. So I think, as Gary Vaynerchuk famously said, you have to market as if you're living in the year you're actually living in, and I think that's true for candidate and team member communications as well.
So, Madeline, both of you are hitting upon the breadth of media, of channels to be used. putting myself in the shoes of a recruiter, that can be overwhelming because it means I've got to now be trying to synchronize communications across all sorts of different channels. How do you herd those cats, either from a technological standpoint or a process standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple things. It's one, thinking about what tools are available. There, you have to go to where the candidates live, and that requires thinking about all the different tools that you might have available to you. That could be video, that could be text, that could be the podcasts, that could be chatbots, and start to look at what's available currently with the systems that you're using, what's available, where you might need to fill in those gaps, and then where are candidates feeling most engaged through the process. You know, I think so often we just rely on the email, we're scared to do anything else. And what happens is candidates receive absolutely no communication. And we'll use like just screening as one example. So if a candidate is going through the process, they get to the background screening section, which is probably the most scary because you don't actually know what's going to come up. You don't know if they're going to find a different Madeline Laurano somewhere else that has a criminal record. And it's scary. And every day feels like 2 weeks. And this process can take some time. And we're not communicating anything to candidates. Imagine being able to send them a quick text and say, you're in the screening process now and it just takes 2 weeks, then we'll let you know. Or imagine being able to communicate that through a chatbot that has loaded FAQs. This is a great way to think about engaging candidates, providing that confidence that isn't happening without these different tools in place.
Let's dig in a little bit more there on the chatbot and the automation piece of this, because that is I think a key thing to modernize your candidate communication is, you know, where can you leverage AI, intelligent chatbots, those types of things. Where have you seen it really succeed in the candidate journey around communication, and where have you seen it fail?
So I think most people think it's just at the apply, right? We just have a chatbot available so we can answer questions as someone's going through the application process. Let them know that there are locations, if it's Starbucks in their area where they can possibly work, you know, communicate those basic questions. But we're actually seeing the use cases expand and becoming really relevant, especially around interviewing. Scheduling interviews, provide information to candidates to say, this is who your manager is. You might want to check out who the team would be. These are some other jobs that you might be qualified for if you haven't considered them. And just be able to use that chatbot functionality, conversational AI, through the interview process. And I think that's a big gap for a lot of companies. So to me, that's a great use case. And then I think the other use case, especially now as companies are working on remote recruiting, is onboarding. So you have somebody that's starting at your company, maybe they can't start for the next 2 months because you don't know if you're going to open. Maybe they're just working from home and feeling really isolated. How can we help them stay engaged and provide some conversational AI capabilities that they wouldn't get otherwise? And they're just sitting there waiting, feeling alone.
Excellent. Jay, that conversation around chatbots, I'm interested if, as you think about how they've worked in broader marketing, if you have any additional ideas of how they can be deployed by recruiters and talent acquisition professionals.
I think Madeline's point about examining where in the funnel a chatbot can be deployed is a good one. Typically, people think of chatbots as a top of the funnel circumstance where you're going to sort of skim off the easy questions and let the bot handle that, which will create some measure of satisfaction on the part of the user, saves the company time and money, etc. However, where chatbots go astray is when they have to handle a super wide variety of questions and inquiries that maybe you don't have a script for. And then it's like, I don't know the answer. Let me give you to a real person. And then you got to hand them off to a person, in which case you could have just called them or emailed them directly faster to begin with. So I think this idea of using the chatbot or deploying it in circumstances where the array of potential inquiries is actually narrower, meaning deeper in the funnel, deeper in the application process, makes a lot of sense. Because after you've already applied, and we talked about this a moment ago, this idea that, boy, they have my application and now they're doing a background check and they said it would be 3 to 5 days and it's been 3. And then because you're just wired that way, you're like, I should follow up just to make sure. That's the time that you really could reap a ton of benefits from some measure of conversational marketing, because the field of inquiries, the number of different types of questions you're going to get in that scenario is relatively narrow, meaning that you can program that technology to deliver a truly superior customer experience or applicant experience in this particular circumstance. So I think that is absolutely the way to think about it, almost upside down, right? So how can you add conversational marketing at the bottom and then bubble it up, instead of how most people think about it, which is let's start at the up and then try and trickle it down.
Interesting. And there also is an element here, I suspect, of learning from what you're being asked or what your chatbot cannot answer.
It should be a circle, right? It's supposed to be, it's supposed to be essentially a living FAQ deployed with some measure of automation. That's the premise. In practice, though, Jeff, you're exactly right. Like, what we see is that not nearly enough people say, well, we built the chatbot, and they like check the box on their Excel spreadsheet of digital transformation artifacts and like, okay, on to the next thing. I guess it's a TikTok account. And instead of saying, all right, every time somebody asks this chatbot a question we can't answer, we need to ask ourselves, why can't the chatbot answer that? Is it a super weird question? Is it something we've never thought of? Is it just not programmed that way? You know, these types of programs should get better all the time, right? That's the idea. It should be almost self-healing. That's what the term machine learning means. But as a practical matter, too often it doesn't actually do that, right? It's a project, not a process. And I think that's a missed opportunity. I'll use Amazon's sort of call to action here internally. This is, of course, not actually doable in the real world, but I love it as a thought exercise. And Amazon uses this in their organization all the time. They say that they should never have to answer the same question twice. That if a second person asks the same question, they have failed. They have failed to therefore answer the question and make the answer easy to find enough that somebody has to ask it again. And I really like that idea as sort of a rallying cry.
That's the difference between a chatbot and conversational AI, right? Anybody can build a chatbot and just load in their FAQs and then it just sits there. Conversational AI gets smarter the more people use it. And I love that example of not asking a second question.
So I'm going to the Q&A board here and go to webinar, and Ashley's got a question about what kind of tools would you recommend that a small company with only one recruiter use for candidate communication? How can that person effectively scale?
Yeah, I can start, and Jay, if you have anything to add to it. But I would say text is really effective, especially if you're a small organization and looking to engage with talent and might not necessarily have a whole arsenal of tools available. Text is a really effective way, and most candidates you'll find will have cell phones and will be willing to engage with you through text. And it gives them options to be able to communicate. The other recommendation I'd have is to go to the provider that you're using for either your ATS or your recruitment marketing platform, if you have one of those in place, and see what options they might have. What I find is oftentimes they have a lot of options. It could be a chatbot, it could be video solutions that you might not be familiar with or might be even available to you through your relationship with them that you're not necessarily taking advantage of. Video is a really effective solution too at different stages. It's very effective with onboarding. It's very effective with interviewing, especially now when we're all remote and doing all of this online engagement. So I would definitely think about text because that's something that is available to everyone. And then again, I'd go to your provider for your ATS and see what solutions they have available.
Excellent. Any further thoughts there, Jay?
Yeah, especially for individuals who are trying to kind of run the whole show, given the fact that email probably is still going to be a core of what you do. I'm a huge proponent of Mixmax. We love that technology in my company, Convince and Convert. We all use it, and it's an email plugin essentially service that works for Gmail, Outlook, etc. And it allows you to track all of the emails that you send and know when somebody opens it, know when somebody clicks, know when somebody downloads. You can attach all kinds of rich media, PDF files, videos, etc. And then allows you to create a very sophisticated tracking database and even do some really interesting kind of mail merge type things in email. It also has an SMS text messaging plugin. To Madeline's point earlier, I use it constantly in my own work when I'm trying to recruit influencers for a program or what have you. It's a really, really effective tool, big time saver, mix max.
Excellent. So don't want to steal thunder from next week's Too Talented. We've got Todd Capone, author of The Transparency Sale, and William Tincup, legend of talent acquisition, joining us to talk about job descriptions and interviewing. But when I think about candidate communication, one of the first places it has to start and how you set the tone is probably in the job description. So Madeline, do you agree with that assessment, and how does it set the tone, and where do you go from there?
I do agree with that. I think it starts in the job description and also in the recruitment marketing efforts, the way that you're engaging with candidates even before they see that job description. So it's interesting, this is really relevant because I just had a call with a company on Friday, and they said that they saw a job description where the word strong was used 12 different times in the job description. So, this is part of communication, right? We're thinking about diversity and inclusion. We're thinking about who we want to attract. We're thinking about the brand that we want to show out there in the market. And we have a job description, and it's using the word strong 12 different times in the job description. And what that does is it isolates a large group of qualified candidates from actually being interested in that job and being interested ultimately in that company. I'm sure Jay knows more about that than I do from a marketing perspective. But the job description is so important because it represents who you are. It invites people to want to be part of your company, and it's a reflection of how that communication is going to continue further along in the process. So to me, it's, I think, absolutely relevant. I think the job description is not talked about enough. I love that you have a dedicated session to it next week. And, I think it's so important to get that communication right then.
Jay, your thoughts, because you've both been hired and hired, and I think that you provide a creative touch to job descriptions, in part because you want to convey kind of the brand this person might be joining, the community this person might be joining.
Absolutely. And I think even more than even before the description, just what do you call the job? I mean, so much of the work that we do as digital strategists at Convince and Convert, we get involved and we are asked on an almost weekly basis to help corporate clients create and revise job descriptions and job titles for enterprise marketing roles, because most of the things that we get involved in didn't exist, right, X number of years ago, or even X number of months ago in some cases. So a lot of times you're creating a role that didn't exist, or you're going to kind of take parts of two previous jobs and try and Frankenstein them together into a new job. And so there isn't really, especially for a lot of these advanced marketing jobs, there isn't really a standard, what do you call this role? You know this, Jeff, when you're trying to staff up a marketing team, you're like, okay, am I looking for a content producer, a video editor, a digital producer? I mean, all these terms are somewhat interchangeable because there really isn't a standard, but you've got to be smart about your SEO. The same way that you think about what's your headline for a blog post, or what is the title of a webinar like this one, you've got to spend the requisite time to say, okay, it doesn't really matter what you want to call this job. It doesn't matter. What matters is, what are people going to type when they're looking for a job like this, right? And so I've seen way too many circumstances where companies are like, well, we call it this. I don't care what you call it. If you call it that, no one will ever find this job unless they're contacted by a recruiter. They will never proactively seek out this job and find it in any sort of directory, because the way you've titled this isn't the way, the taxonomy that people actually use to find positions like this. The other thing that and Madeline, I'm sure you've seen this, that drives me crazy, is people put together a job description, especially for a new role, and they don't show it to their existing team and say, hey, is this actually the way it works here? Because here's the deal, guys, little tough love, the people writing the job descriptions almost never have any idea what that actual job does day to day. So why don't we let the people who are actually going to be colleagues of this imaginary new person actually say, yeah, that is kind of how we see this job happening.
100%. That happens all the time. You're writing something or you want it to sound exciting and cool, but you have no idea what the job is, so you don't make it clear what those responsibilities are. Who's going to be interested in that?
So now I want to take that part of the conversation, because in the job description you've now set up, hopefully with specificity and a way to kind of manage expectations, the type of candidates you're going to get in. So now let's focus in that pre-interview process of communication. What's the tone? What's the type of content pre-interview where you're driving to a point of you're whittling down the candidates? What is the appropriate cadence or types of communications there, Madeline, that can really convey and also be a filter, an appropriate filter for the type of quality candidate you're looking for?
It's so important. To me, this is like the biggest missed opportunity in talent acquisition is the pre-interview and the interview. We don't communicate with candidates about what to expect even during the interview. Sometimes they just want to know the basics of who are they going to interview with. What can they expect? Who's going to be in the interview room with them? Who's going to be, part of this process? How long after the interview should they expect to hear some type of response? We don't provide any of that information. We don't even, and oftentimes don't provide information on who the manager is. Here's a bio, here's their LinkedIn profile. Here's some information on who your manager is. They just started with the company a year ago. We're really excited to have them. These are a few people that would be on the team with you. All of this information helps people feel prepared. Imagine if you were going to take a vacation, we'll use the Greek islands as an example, and they said, you're going to get on a plane and you're going to go to the Greek islands. We're not going to tell you what island you're going to. We don't even know who you're going to be with. You're going to be with people, but you're going to go and it's going to be great. Would you? I don't think I'd go. I want to go to the Greek islands. I don't know. That seems a little bit unsettling, but we do that to candidates all the time. So to me, the more communication, the better. Being able to provide that information and then being able to provide the follow-up. The other piece that's really important right now is the remote recruiting. And that's so important with interviewing because people are doing, right now I'm on video and I'm not that comfortable on video. A lot of people are not comfortable on video. And we're expecting candidates for the first time to get in, present their best selves and do that all on video, which is not a comfortable vehicle for communication for a lot of people. So to be able to provide little tips, and I see companies doing this and I think it's great, we're a professional environment. It would be great if you could dress, business casual or business professional. It helps if the window is facing you. This is something I've been learning too. It's better to face a window than have a window behind you. If you have natural lighting, that's the best. Little tips that can help candidates feel more comfortable and more confident in this virtual world and remote world that we're all in today.
I'm so interested in this line of conversation, Jay, because you being a brand marketer, somebody who consults with some of the biggest brands around the globe, a lot of this comes down to conveying who you are as a culture and that you care about the individual. So I'm intrigued with the parallels that you might see between your world and this world on this particular topic.
82% of chief marketing officers in 2020 believe, according to the research, that they will be competing primarily on the basis of customer experience this year. They will not be competing on price. They will not be competing on availability. They will not be competing on selection. They will be competing on customer experience because everything else tends to end up being pretty close to the same. Right? There are very few categories where you truly have sort of secret sauce or some kind of moat around your business that nobody else can touch, right? Uber has Lyft, et cetera, et cetera. And it is just as important, if not more important, to understand that from a recruiting standpoint, it's not about what you pay. It's not about for whom this applicant will work. It's not even about the job description. It is about the applicant experience. And especially if you're trying to reach applicants and potential team members who have options you better get that right from the first word till the last word. And I love what Madeline nodded to, this idea, especially now in the pandemic where we're not doing a lot of face-to-face interviews, even something as simple as, hey, let us explain to you how we prefer to do virtual interviews, the technology we use, some tips for making sure that you have your best experience, whether it's lighting or microphones or bandwidth or anything else. It's just little things like that. And it's not like there's some sort of, Dead Sea Scroll secrets in here, like there'd be an Indiana Jones movie about it. It's just showing applicants that you care. Because the same way that dogs can smell fear or bees know if there's no queen in the hive, applicants know, they can tell if you're just going through the motions. And if you are just going through the motions, then frankly, you get what you deserve.
3 points for the callback to the bees, by the way, Jay. Madeline, 3 points. So that's what you're competing with.
I was going to say, I agree 100%. And I think, it's also around the tone in the communication. There's a lot of talk around empathy. It's sort of become a buzzword around communication in general right now, but that tone in the communication, especially around the interview, is so important. Somebody walks into a room to do an interview and they're judged right away. Right away, they're judged by what they're wearing, who they are, what they look like, how they present themselves, if they smile too much, if they don't smile enough, they're being judged. And to be able to look at this interview process through a different lens and communicate that in a different lens to say, we know this is a challenging time. Thanks for doing this through video. It's okay if you want to wear a t-shirt. We wear t-shirts all the time when we do video calls internally. We're glad that you're here. Thank you so much. Your lighting looks great. We appreciate you being flexible as we're trying to be flexible, and we're all in this together. And that sort of is a different approach than how traditional interviews are done, which is we are judging you right now. This is saying we're all in this together. It's weird. We appreciate you, and we want to learn a little bit more about you.
So, Madeline, I want to dig in further on that, because it's not only the responsibility then of the recruiter, there's also a hiring manager and interviewers in that chain. So the recruiter is probably closer to that empathy and also is thinking about the communication strategy here. What's the obligation or the need of the recruiter to help shape and educate or work with hiring managers and the interviewers to ensure candidate communication is empathetic, it's responsive, it's all of those things?
It's really challenging for recruiters because the hiring manager piece has always been a challenge. We've had to, as recruiters, think about scheduling with hiring managers, making sure that they have the information they need, making sure they reviewed who this candidate is before they come to the interview. And now we're doing all of this remotely and making sure that they're empathetic as well. So it's definitely challenging. I think, to me, the recruiter is in a very unique place because they set the tone. And they set the tone not just with the candidate, but with the hiring manager too. So to me, the same communication that goes to the candidate from the recruiter also goes to the hiring manager. We know you're at home. We know you're taking time out to do this interview so that we can make sure we get the right person on your team. We know you've got kids running around. We know you're doing homeschooling. We know you don't have time to put a suit on. This is what we know about the candidate. We're trying to make it as easy as possible, and we appreciate you being here. To me, the communication goes both ways. And I think oftentimes the hiring manager becomes the bad guy, but they're going through the same thing that the candidate's going through as well.
Wait, I had time to put a suit on, so that's not irrelevant.
I did not.
And grow those plants. I'm very impressed with your greenery, Jay. Hey, it's untouchable back.
It's real plants too. That's no joke.
I'm impressed.
I would never use false plants in a webinar with you, Jeff, because your eagle eye would know for a fact that those are inauthentic.
I would zero in on that. I got to be honest. Jay, as Madeline was talking, I was flashing back to the challenges that frontline marketers have, email marketers, social media marketers, getting their leadership all the way up to their CMO to need and understand their needs. So is there anything that you've learned from that marketing dynamic that you could impart upon recruiters and talent acquisition professionals on this session today about how you get the importance of these concepts of personal communication, of timely communication, of empathy into the ears of leadership in ways that it's actually going to have some profound change on behavior so they have a better candidate experience?
I would say one observation and two recommendations. First, you have to understand that whatever your job is, you're an email marketer, you're a social media marketer, you're a salesperson, what have you, your boss's boss doesn't care. You are truly a cog in a larger universe there, because their job is to say, what is the overall revenue of the firm? What is the revenue trajectory of the firm? What is our debt? What are we going to do about getting people back into an office? How do we keep people safe? And so, Jeff, you've worked in big companies. The executive level is vaguely interested in what happens when they send out email, but it's so many levels down from their day-to-day existence that they can't really understand, right? It's like, I trust we have smart people handling that. So you have to realize that nobody cares about your job the way you do. That's why it's your job. And the same thing is true in HR and recruiting. The executives don't care about HR and recruiting as much as you do, because that's not their job, it's your job. So you have to understand that part of your responsibility as a professional is to merchandise your own work and your own need internally. And you do that in two ways. First, you merchandise your own needs and your own worth with data. The best case scenario would be to use Madeline's example and say, Mrs. CEO, we have determined that when we make offers to applicants that we prefer, if we have communicated with them this way, our acceptance rate is 71%. However, when we communicate with them this other way, it's 42%, because we have tested it side by side. Consequently, our recommendation is, of course, that we use the first version as the way we communicate with applicants for all, right? You're actually fighting the fight with data, and executives are trained to make decisions based on data. However, you also can't neglect that executives, even executives that are trained in finance or science or other kind of hard fact circumstances, are also human beings, and as such are motivated by story and anecdote. So even if you don't have the ability to use data to say, we A/B tested our candidate communications and this works better than that, and in small companies that's probably not practical, you can absolutely say, Mrs. CEO, I'd like to take a moment to just tell you a story about a candidate that we lost and we didn't know why. And then we found out later it was because how we handled this particular communications challenge with her. We don't know if that's significant mathematically, but it sure is important to how we made that candidate feel. We'd like to recommend doing it differently. So you can either fight the fight with math, or you can fight the fight with stories. People who are really good at this fight it with both.
Madeline, how does that resonate with you and what you see out there?
It absolutely does. It's the qualitative and the quantitative research component. And I think talent acquisition is being held accountable for that. I think that's absolutely spot on. So, and I think that's a perfect example to be able to say, when we communicate this way, the acceptance rate is much higher. And you can do that for many different scenarios. You can look at candidate engagement scores if you do candidate engagement surveys and see what those results say. You can look at first year retention, and that's something that you should be able to get access to within your organization, to be able to say, we've changed our communication style now with candidates, and we're providing text and we're providing video and chatbots or whatever it is. And we've noticed that first year retention has improved by 20%, whatever it might be. To be able to show those statistics and be able to come at it from a data perspective is going to get attention. And then to be able to provide those stories. And to me, a lot of those stories can come from brand too, to be able to say, we know that 40% of the people that apply for a job with our company are also customers, and we haven't communicated to them at all through this process. How likely are they to come back and shop in our stores, come to our restaurants? And that sits with someone. That's a painful thing to think about. You know, we haven't given them such a bad experience, and they're going home and telling their family and their friends, and they might not want to be customers. Brand is so important right now. I mean, Jay, you know that better than I do. It's so entrenched in talent acquisition.
Look, people think they build brands when times are good, but they don't really. When times are good, everybody's brand is good for the most part because everybody's loving life. When you build a brand and when you differentiate your brand is right now, when times aren't good. That's why brand building is an investment. It's easy to have a good brand when everybody's making money and the economy's great and the world is fantastic. What sets you apart is how you handle your stuff now. And I've said this a few times over the last few months to clients and friends, and I really believe this. How you handle your organization over the next 6 months, from recruiting all the way to customer service, how you handle yourself in the next 6 months will have a material impact on the success of your company for the next 6 years. I absolutely believe that to be true, because where the wheat and the chaff separate is in the bad times. In the good times, I don't know which is better, wheat or chaff. I'm not sure how that analogy works, but whichever is the bad one continues to be good because everybody's doing so well, it kind of lifts them up. This is when you decide who has a brand that will stand the test of time, and hopefully that's you.
You don't want to eat chaff. I know that. I know that for a fact. Now, we do have a question from the audience as we wrap up here. How often should you touch base with a candidate after interviews have been completed and until a decision has been made? Madeline?
I'd say the first step is to figure out how long it usually takes from that time. How long from the time an interview is conducted to someone receiving an offer? Is that 2 weeks for your organization? What on average is that time frame for your company? And then come up with a cadence that works for you. To me, right now, over communication is better than under communication, especially, Jay, to your point earlier, we're further down in the funnel. There's less people to communicate with. Yeah. To be able to reach out every day, every other day and say, we're still really interested. Thanks so much for coming in. We just haven't made a decision yet. Thank you so much and we appreciate you. That can happen frequently and nobody's going to get offended by that. And there aren't a lot of people that you're going to need to do that with since you're just at the interview stage.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it also a matter, Jay, of managing expectations? It's both how you communicate, but how you've communicated earlier to set expectations and meet those.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you've set them to the degree that people aren't feeling like you promised one thing and something different is happening. But even when you set expectations or try to, sometimes people don't pay attention to that, certainly. And I would argue that right now, for a number of circumstances that are economic and pandemic related, the penalty of uncertainty is higher now than it's been certainly in my professional lifetime. All consumers, all job seekers, everybody, all of us are now discombobulated by uncertainty in a way that we haven't maybe ever. And so every time your candidate isn't sure whether they're still in the running, or they're not sure when they're going to hear back, or they're not sure what the salary is going to be, or they're not sure anything, that causes disproportionate anguish and angst than it used to. So I would not be concerned right now at over communicating. And in fact, in my whole career, it's pretty rare that anybody has ever said, you know what, please stop informing me. I know too much.
Right.
Well, that seems like an appropriate ending point. Although I do not want to end. Madeline, to your point, I think I could go on for a couple of hours with the two of you in this conversation.
I could do a suit change. We could do another round of it.
I know we could do another round too.
We may bring you back on a quarterly basis or monthly. We'll figure that out and negotiate plans. And
new podcast, Jeff. It's not too late.
Well, I want to thank you both for participating today and everyone for joining. If you do have any questions about the offerings from Jobvite, please visit our website. We do provide a full end-to-end talent acquisition suite and handle many of the automation and candidate communication needs you might have through text and chatbot. And I want to remind you, this is also part of the Summer to Evolve, and we've got 2 more great pieces of live content coming this week with Demo Days and the Break Room with Damon Wayans and Chris Jones. Please go to thesummertoevolve.com to register. Please join me in thanking Madeline and Jay, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.